Hello, everybody. This is Glenn Maurer, and we're here again doing fall 2016 episodes of The Next Step, which will be broadcast on cable access television in Santa Barbara on Cable 17. Also, you can find it on Ustream and YouTube if you Google the TVSB, The Next Step. Be sure you get the TVSB in there, The Next Step, because that may take you elsewhere. The Next Step, TVSB. Ustream and YouTube. Anyway, today we're going to begin a series of programs discussing the ballot initiatives that are coming up for the voters this year, and it's going to be a lot. I think there are 17 initiatives or referendum on the ballot this year in California. The voter pamphlet's like 150 pages, which I imagine one out of 150 people might actually look through. So the voters will be asked to make a lot of decisions based on advertising and political reaction and thought. And one of the issues that they're going to be asked to decide that has been before us before. This is the question of the death penalty in California. Proposition 62 is an attempt again by concerned people to just take care of this issue once for all and change the California Constitution so that the death penalty will no longer be available to prosecutors in the state of California. If it passes, it will substitute life without possibility of parole instead of the death penalty per se. And there's a good many reasons which we will discuss about why this might happen. But it's not the first time it's been on the ballot. It was on the ballot 2 or 4 years ago, I can't remember. Barely failed because of advertisements that were written to scare us. And that'll happen again this time. And it's also been, death penalty in California was thrown out of the state about 30 years ago by the Supreme Court, but then reinstated a few years later when it was modified to take away some of the discretions. And then finally, we're back here today with the long history of the litigation of the death penalty in California and the problems that that's created. And to join us is a man who knows so much more about this than I do, and most Californians would do, Robert Landheer. Robert is a certified criminal law specialist, but more importantly, he's a expert in death penalty writs and appeals and the work of the death penalty and the situation vis-a-vis the death penalty as it exists in California at this date. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you, Glenn. Good to be here.
So what did I say that was wrong there? Did I get some of that stuff incorrect, or is it fairly accurate?
No, I think it's correct. I think that nobody's really qualified to speak about the death penalty in its state. It's so absolutely dysfunctional. Mm-hmm. And I say that not as a personal kind of opinion, but even the Supreme Court Chief Justice, Kantil Sayuh, says that, and she said this in 2008 when she first came on the court, that she was very concerned about the costs and, number two, the effectiveness due to the delays in this punishment even being administered.
So this is the California Supreme Court Chief Justice, and appellate court judges in the federal level and other people who've examined this have pointed out for years that it's essentially dysfunctional. I mean, what is the average time on death row now? It's like in California, 19 years, I think I saw.
Well, is
that possible to calculate?
I mean, some people have been there since 1978, since it was reinstituted. So there's right now 747, I believe is the statistic, of inmates, condemned inmates. So out of that 747 inmates, some have been there for 20, 25 years. And then, of course, every year there are 15 or 20 more added. But the real concern, I think, Glenn, is not just the age of the inmates, but the fair administration of justice at this point. And I think courts are beginning to recognize, not as a novel theory, but as a truth, that it's cruel and unusual for the inmates, for the victims, for everybody, for this to go on and on and on.
You mean the process of appeal and
Process.
review?
Process. Now,
Trial, appeal, and appellate reviews further.
and to say that, there's no shortcut. And no matter what the people say in terms of Prop 66, you can't say 5 years, let's get it done.
Well, we'll get to that to a moment. Prop 62 is the specific law we're talking about, proposed law that we're talking about, which would abolish the death penalty in California, substitute in its place life without possibility of parole, and make a few other process changes.
Yes.
It promises huge savings,
Yes.
economic savings. I think 150 million a year was the number I saw.
Correct.
And this savings would come from the lack of appellate process, lower security institutions, more effective incarceration, less trial time.
All of the above.
All of these things.
Correct, correct.
And the alternative to that is to continue the present system with 747 inmates growing in prisons in one centralized high-intensity, high-cost prison in California, and all kinds of appellate review. So there are those who say, well, the problem isn't the death penalty. The problem is that there are all these lawyers and clever folks who are trying to delay things and make it cost us money, and it shouldn't cost us that kind of money to execute a few guilty people. So why don't we get rid of some of these processes and speed it up, and that will save us money as well. And they put an initiative on the ballot, which you referred to a moment ago, Prop 66. What does Prop 66 promise to do?
Well, I think it's not a promise as much as it's a selling of some idea that this can be streamlined, and it just can't. It takes years, up to 5 years, 6 years sometimes, before the court even gets around to appointing counsel. So the delay is inherent, systemic, right from the beginning. And the beginning is there are not enough qualified lawyers to do this.
Well,
and the court itself can't even get the ball rolling for 3, 4, 5 years. Appointed counsel.
I understand that those are the facts on the ground that you're just
Yep.
describing. But Prop 66 says we will have all of this done in 5 years.
Yes.
If you pass Prop 66,
Yes.
all of these reviews, all these appeals, all these hearings will be done in 5 years at the most. But you're pointing out that, number one, it takes 2 or 3 years just to get a lawyer appointed to handle these cases.
Correct.
Where does Prop 66 think these lawyers will come from?
Well, so every county has lawyers who are representing criminal defendants. There are panel lawyers. California Appellate Project distributes criminal appeals to these lawyers on panels. So the Prop 66 proponents suggests that if you're on one of these panels as an appellate lawyer, you can be required or mandated to take a death penalty case. That is a problem because many of those lawyers have never represented never represented or, in fact, appealed murder cases, so they're not qualified.
But on top of which, they have a business to do. You don't just create new lawyers by telling them they're going to have a new burden. There's still only so many lawyers doing so much work.
Right.
So I don't understand how they think that taking a lawyer from one job and putting that lawyer on a different job is going to make any difference. I mean, these appellate lawyers or these lawyers that are doing this work already are doing work of some kind. If they get removed from that work,
right,
that will go undone.
And the problem with these lawyers is that they cannot begin to grapple with the kind of records that there are.
You brought here just as an exhibit. Why don't you put that up on the table?
I will for a second here.
I mean, I know that there is a certain mindset that says lawyers are just create paperwork. But
Yeah.
what is this? These are evidence and pleadings and briefs in a case which is how many years old?
Okay, so this is a case I'm representing a condemned man in. It's about 1,000 pages, of a petition for habeas corpus.
This is the subsequent to conviction, subsequent to appeal, and the following proceeding in the federal court.
Well, no,
No,
this
this
is
is
still in
state
state
court.
court. This is still in state court. So this document cannot really be created in a year.
Well, I can see that.
It
And it
cannot
represents
happen.
work, it represents evidence and documents and research that's been done over many years itself. So you don't-
Investigation.
Right, investigations.
Outside the direct appeal. So there's two levels going on. There's a direct appeal that the state Supreme Court handles every one in California. It's constitutionally mandated. This is a different animal. This is the habeas animal. So what is habeas
Well,
is
I'm
the
just trying
next
to
question.
Let some of
Yep.
the audience understand that this is just one small, way down the line kind of part of the process.
Correct.
This case, I think you said, is at least 13 years old.
So this was filed in 2003.
Okay, so that makes it 13 years since this was filed.
The direct appeal was filed a year before that.
And the general idea, though, I'm going to tell you, is the general idea is, well, just move it along. Let's do it faster. Let's have all the judges in the state of California should spend all their time doing death penalty hearings, right? All the lawyers, criminal defense lawyers, and all the lawyers should do their time doing death penalty cases, right? Is that would be the only possible way? If you just took all the resources of the legal system, our criminal justice system, and put 70 or 80% of it into death penalty cases, could that move it along in 5 years?
So what one of the theoretical propositions is that if the Supreme Court was to turn aside all of its work, civil appeals, other criminal appeals, it might be 4 years that they could get rid of the backlog, which is the 700. Meanwhile,
More cases.
more cases are coming. It is the case that the backlog will always be there. They can never get rid of it at this point. And so what the idea of the Prop 66 people is to distribute it to the superior courts,
Yeah.
part of the review process. But it's going to create two new layers of review.
And create huge amounts of inconsistency because these lower courts are not going to have a uniform view of these same issues. So they're all going to get churned up that way. I mean, we can see a lot of arguments about that. But the point being, it's a huge amount of work just to catch up. And sometimes when you try to do it too fast, errors are made. Things get ignored. I mean, I read recently that there were 90 people, I think, in California who have been exonerated while after conviction, while on death row. Whatever the number is,
I think it's more accurate to say that after federal review, some of those cases have been reduced to life without parole, and I think that actually 3 sentenced have been exonerated.
right, okay, I thought
Okay.
I had a different
Yeah.
number. But the point being, there is some reason for this process. It takes somebody to look at this objectively and to try not to pay attention, not be detracted by the rush to judgment kind of thing. Experience it. So $150 million a year in savings by reducing the burden on the courts and the attorneys and the cost of the attorneys. And we would join, if we passed the abolishment of the death penalty, we would join 30 other states that have already abolished the death penalty in their states, and all of Europe, and almost all the civilized world, really. But relatively few countries in the world, national states that we would respect, have a death penalty any longer. The only ones I can think of are like China, Vietnam, some places in the Egypt and the Muslim world. These are not countries we want to emulate. Well, doesn't it seem odd that the United States still is one of the last bastions of the death penalty?
Well, California is probably the largest, most expensive death row in the Western Hemisphere. That is
Interesting
statistically
concept, yeah.
true. California.
Yeah, with state alone in California.
And the 3 counties responsible for about 750 of those are Los Angeles County, Riverside County, and San Bernardino County. So what we have is a phenomenon in California where those counties have put more people on death row than all the other counties combined.
I think that, and that's a point the public need, I mean, what you're saying that just as a matter of statistics.
Yes.
You've looked at this. And those are large
Yes.
counties.
Yes.
It's not like they're small counties, they're big counties, but they're still not more than, 50% of the population of the state of California, maybe at the most. So we have this, what you're talking about there is something I tried to address when I was running for Attorney General and Green Party candidate. Nobody was going to listen to me, but one of the real evils of the death penalty is its prosecutorial discretion as to who gets the death penalty, who's eligible in their parlance, who's eligible for the death penalty, and it's done on a county by county basis. So some counties would take the same behavior, same conduct, same criminal act, and never ask for the death penalty, and other counties would take much less egregious behavior
Right.
and seek the death penalty, which creates some of the tension about why it's unfair.
Right, and why it's arbitrary and capricious. But the biggest problem with people that are in trial for death is that the pressure on the defense attorneys, the kind of representation they get is often insufficient in terms of federal constitutional guidelines. So that representation, as I think Judge Ginsburg said, is she's never seen a case in front of her. She's never seen a case in front of her where the defendant was well represented.
Well, I'm going to feel a little defensive about that. I mean, I think the problem is that it's almost impossible to defend a person in a death penalty case and do it, quote unquote, well and right.
Correct.
Yeah, it just is the nature of the crime and the burden of the penalty that makes whatever you do inadequate to the task. Because I used to remember thinking about it. I remember thinking, if I was fortunate because when I was doing criminal defense work, I did not have a death penalty case. The death penalty wasn't in place when I was young, when I was in that practice. And so I thought about that. But I watched the older lawyers in the office who had had these cases over the years, and the burden on them was exhausting.
Yeah.
It was completely destructive. Many of them became alcoholics. Many of them become burned out hulks of people because I think the thing that extracts from the lawyers is so awesomely burdensome because they don't know. Even the best-minded, and even the most talented lawyer doesn't know what to do in this case with this jury, with these facts, with this judge. And so on review, if you look at it on review 20 years later, you're going to criticize something that they did. But it's not because they were inadequate or incompetent. It's because the nature of that burden is so daunting, is my opinion. So I think that's another reason just to get rid of the death penalty. It's just not fair to the arbitrariness of the imposition, the DAs that select it, and the question of who's going to be the lawyer on this case. Maybe one lawyer could have saved that life where another one didn't. But it's not the failure of the lawyer, it's just the way it's assigned, the randomness of it.
Well, part of it, though, is that the kind of investigation that goes into these cases cannot be thorough enough. To prepare a case for a death case can take anywhere from 3 to 4 years.
But if I might, the implication of that is that if we gave them enough time, they could do the job right, and I don't think that's possible. I think no matter what they did, it would be inadequate because it's just so arbitrarily assigned. It's so, the idea that somehow somebody's going to dig out all the relevant facts and then we could have a trial, and the trial would be so good that we would find the death penalty appropriate and everybody would be happy, is not true for me. I'm not going to be happy with it because I don't think the death penalty is the appropriate penalty in any case.
Well, I'd say you could start with the death-qualified jurors as a problem. That process takes 2 or 3 weeks. And what does that mean to death-qualify a jury? Well, it means that you've got to ask a lot of questions. And in the end, some of those jurors are answering some of those questions in good faith and some are not. And you're getting a jury that right from the beginning is a creature of extraordinary creation. It's people that say, yes, we agree with death being a punishment, and all the others are excluded.
That's right, and that's the truth, yeah.
So that's just part of it.
Anyway, so all these reasons, the actual implementation of a fair death penalty it's an oxymoron in my mind, but a fair death penalty, I think is almost impossible to imagine.
Yes.
And it's certainly impossible in a society in which the resources given to the defense at trial level and appellate level and otherwise are so de minimis. And it's certainly impossible if it's all going to have to be done in a few years. 5 years is this proposal, Prop 66. But the other thing we want to talk about a little bit, because there's some temptation in here, and I want people to pay attention to this. On the ballot, just as on other issues this year in California, there are often two measures on the ballots, one of which on its face abolish the death penalty, the other on its face reform the death penalty, and it looks like, well, you just choose between one and the others, or maybe you go for both, because reform the death penalty and have some of these nice little things that it mentions, and they're like inmates will work and contribute to restitution funds for victims and all that. Sound tempting. Be careful, because almost always these are traps, Trojan horses that have been laid, and here is a case exactly in that. If the voters of California vote to abolish the death penalty, and current public opinion polls say they're inclined to do that, but let's say they vote 52 to 48, the opposite of what they voted last time, and they abolish the death penalty by passing Proposition 62.
Which is life without possibility of parole. That's the key, Glenn.
People have to understand that too. People have said that doesn't really mean life without possibility of parole, but it does. There's been nobody released from California prisons under a sentence of life without possibility of parole since it's existed in the books of the state of California. So it's a meaningful thing.
And I think 48% of the people would support that as to saying we're abolishing the death penalty. If it's abolish the death penalty versus in favor of the death penalty, it's a different poll result. But most people are very responsive to the notion.
The polls show that they're inclined to do it by that number,
That's
at least 52-48, opposite of how it came out last time. But the danger here is if they also decide to vote for 66, Proposition 66, which claims to be a reform of the process, more resources, faster processing, less delay, all these things that have a certain knee-jerk appeal, restitution by inmates, decentralizing death row, I don't know what that's about, but something along those lines. If you vote for both of these, and other people vote for 66 as well, and it passes by a greater majority, it will abolish the vote eliminate the vote you had on Prop 62 trying to eliminate the death penalty. So it's really, really important the public pay attention to this. Prop 62 abolish the death penalty. If you vote yes on that, you should not really vote yes on 66, no matter how seductive it might sound on its face, because if 66 passes by more votes than 62, the death penalty will continue in California.
And I think that's really an important point, that people have to realize that this fix-it is not a fix-it, and that you vote no on it, and that it's really life without possibility of parole. 62. 66 is going to be a $1 billion event every 5 years. So far it's cost this state $4 to $5 billion since the death penalty has been inaugurated in '78. That means that we have had 13 executions over the last 30 plus years?
In California.
In California. 13 executions, and we spent $4 or $5 billion for that. What does that mean in terms of justice, the fair administration of justice?
Well, it means it's very expensive.
Yeah.
Partly what it means, and without regard to the moral imperative or moral question of whether we should be involved as a society in killing our own members as an act of retribution, really, or vengeance is what it seems to me it comes down to. But separate from that, the economic costs are real. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things in Prop 66 that people should be suspicious of. This five-year timeline you mentioned, there's not enough resources to do that.
Well, the other problem is that the counties are going to be paying for this, and how can they pay for it?
Because they'll have to provide the attorneys and the judges and the courtrooms. And
Correct. So there are calculations that show that some counties will use their entire county budget on just death penalty cases, appeals, and so forth. And that not only will the judges, I think there's 1,000+ judges in California, not only will they be overwhelmed by having to then deal with habeas petitions like this in their courts, but those petitions will then go to an appellate court review, and those petitions will then go to the Supreme Court, and a lot of them will come back again.
So just stack up even more backlog.
It's a 2-layer additional review process with nothing but more time.
That they've created.
Yes.
In this
Yes.
proposed statute.
Yes.
Okay, that's important to know that. Also, a couple other things, let's think about them. We're running toward the end of this program, but just think about some of the silliness that's put in here. They want inmates in death row to work, to have jobs, to work and pay restitution. Well, to begin with, inmates in prisons in California get like 12 cents an hour or some de minimis token amount of money. So any amount of economic benefit that these inmates could generate would be such a tiny, tiny amount of restitution to any family or victim that it's farce to even discuss it seriously. Secondly, the security involved in taking death row inmates and putting them in job environments is just not going to happen. The guards won't allow it. The prisons won't allow it. I don't know what they think is going to, they're going to sit there and work on computers and produce widgets. I don't know what they're thinking about that. So that's a lie. It's only put in there to make you think that the law has got some, good thing in it, making these people work and helping the victims. So there's a lot of reasons not to, but remember, the worst reason to vote for 66 is that it will, in fact, replace the existing death penalty with a worse process and not provide adequate resources to see the timelines that they're presenting can possibly be accomplished. There won't be enough lawyers or judges. So I was not surprisingly, by the way, I saw our local sheriff Bill Brown was supporting this.
I saw that too.
Prop 66. It really bothers me.
And the Sheriff's Association of California.
Yeah, but Bill Brown should know better in this county. Okay, I want to a couple of things I want to say along the lines of the health of the ballot. There's a group called Healthcare for All that presents programs. There's going to be an issue on the ballot about prescription drug costs. We did a program on that a while back. There is a program they're offering this coming week, October 16th at 2 p.m. at the Faulkner Library on healthcare at the tipping point. You might want to catch that. And we have a new guest on, a new staff on the show, Ken Baxter. So welcome, Ken. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Juanita, for your work in getting this show on the air.